The sun hung low over the Texas plains, a molten orb sinking behind jagged buttes, spilling crimson across the sky like a fresh wound. Dust swirled along the rutted path leading to the Hastings homestead, where a lone rider approached, his silhouette jagged against the dying light. Inside the cabin, Eleanor Hastings stood with her fists clenched, her breath tight in her chest. Her father, Jedediah, loomed over her, his face lined with hard years and harder choices. His hands, rough as bark, rested on the table, steady despite the weight of what he was about to do. "You listen to me, girl," he said, his voice heavy as iron. "This ain't a matter of want. It's a matter of need. I can't protect this land no more, and I can't protect you neither." Ellie's heart pounded. "So you sell me instead?" Jedediah's mouth thinned. "I'm savon you." She wanted to scream, to beg, to shake sense into the man who had raised her, but the resolve in his eyes was stone. Outside, boots crunched against dry earth. The door swung open, and the stench of sweat and whiskey filled the cabin. Elias Red Jack Dalton stood in the threshold, his broad frame cutting off the last light of the evening. His grin was a knife's edge, his scarred face stretched taut with amusement. Behind him, his men lingered, shadows with gun belts, their presence thick with unspoken threat. Ellie swallowed against the bile rising in her throat. "Ain't she a beauty?" Red Jack drawled, stepping forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. He smelled of blood and tobacco, the scent curling in Ellie's nostrils. "Been wanting a woman with some fire in her. I reckon she'll do just fine." Jedediah's gaze flickered to his daughter, then away. "It's done." Ellie turned on him, desperation clawing up her throat. "You can't." Red Jack moved faster than she expected, his calloused fingers clamping around her wrist. "Oh, he can." And he did. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "You best behave, darling. It'll be easier for you." Ellie jerked back, but his grip was a vice. Her pulse thundered as Red Jack pulled her toward the door. The cool night air did nothing to soothe the fire raging in her veins. The wedding was a mockery of sanctity. A traveling preacher mumbled the words under the glow of a flickering lantern, his voice shaking, his eyes darting to the armed men surrounding them. Ellie barely heard the vows, barely registered the cold band of metal sliding onto her finger. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stood firm, refusing to give Red Jack the satisfaction of seeing her break. The kiss was rough, a claim rather than affection. His lips pressed against hers, hard and unyielding, and when he pulled away, the smirk on his face made her skin crawl. The night stretched long, the road endless. Red Jack had thrown her onto the back of his horse, his arms caging her as they rode into the blackness. She felt every jolt, every shift of muscle beneath his coat, but she refused to shiver beneath his touch. When they reached the outlaw camp, the men greeted them with hoots and jeers. Fires crackled, the scent of charred meat thick in the air. A bottle was thrust into Red Jack's hand, and he took a long swig before grabbing Ellie's chin, forcing her to look at him. "You belong to me now," he murmured, his voice slick with liquor. "Try to run. I'll let the boys have their fun before I drag you back." Ellie met his gaze, her stomach churning. She would not cry. She would not beg. Red Jack chuckled, as if reading her defiance. "You'll learn." He shoved her toward a small, ragged tent at the edge of the camp. "Inside." Now, Ellie stepped inside, her body taut with anger and fear. The space was bare, furs on the ground, a few scattered belongings. She wrapped her arms around herself as the sounds of laughter and drunken revelry echoed outside. Her mind raced. There had to be a way out. She had to find it before she became nothing more than another ghost swallowed by the frontier. Outside, a shadow moved beyond the firelight, watching, waiting. The embers of the outlaw campfire smoldered as the night stretched long and unforgiving. Ellie sat rigid inside the tent, her ears attuned to every drunken laugh, every murmured conversation, every movement beyond the thin fabric that barely shielded her from the men who lurked outside. Her hands, balled into fists, trembled not with fear but with the raw, simmering anger that refused to die. She would not let this be her life. The first attempt came before dawn. Red Jack, lost in whiskey and arrogance, had passed out beside her, his boots still on, his arm thrown across his chest. His breathing was deep, steady. The scent of alcohol clung to his breath, thick and acrid. Ellie moved slow, careful, inching toward the flap of the tent. Outside, the fire had dwindled to embers. The outlaws lay scattered in makeshift bedrolls, some snoring, others dead to the world. Her heart pounded as she slipped beyond the camp's boundary, past the tethered horses, past the circle of men who had wagered on her suffering. She was nearly to the trees when the crack of a gunshot split the air. The camp came alive in a heartbeat. Boots hit the dirt. Shouts rang out. Ellie ran. Her bare feet tore against jagged rocks, her lungs burning with the force of her escape. Branches lashed her skin, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. She tore through the wilderness, guided only by instinct and desperation. Then came the howls, Red Jack's men, a pack of wolves set on her trail. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The world blurred around her. Trees twisted into dark, shifting shadows. The ground pitched and fell beneath her steps. Her body begged her to stop, but she forced herself forward, deeper into the wilderness, where the land was wild and unkind. Then nothing. The ground vanished. Ellie tumbled, her body crashing through brush and stone, rolling, falling, until everything went black. She woke to silence. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body aching. A gash along her temple pulsed with dull, insistent pain, and her ankle throbbed, twisted from the fall. Above her, the sky had softened into the hues of early dawn, the first streaks of light creeping over the horizon. She tried to move, but winced. The fall had slowed her down, and soon, Red Jack would be upon her. A rustle. She froze. Something, or someone, was near. Her fingers found a jagged rock, and she clutched it tight, willing her breath to steady. The rustling grew closer. A figure emerged from the foliage, dark against the rising sun. A man, not an outlaw. His stance was different, his presence quieter, deliberate. His long, dark hair framed a face marked by war paint. His expression unreadable beneath the careful stillness of a hunter who had learned to move with the earth, not against it. A Comanche. Ellie's grip on the stone tightened. She had heard stories meant to frighten children, tales spun by men who feared what they did not understand. But standing before her, this warrior was no monster. He was something else, something she could not yet name. He said nothing. She did not move. A gunshot shattered the stillness. Red Jack's men were close. Too close. The warrior's gaze flicked toward the sound, then back to Ellie. A silent moment passed between them. A choice. Then, swift as shadow, he moved. He hauled her to her feet, his grip firm, but not cruel. Ellie staggered, pain shooting up her leg, but he held her steady. With a single glance, he urged her forward. There was no time for trust, no time for fear. Only survival. He led her through the wilderness with practiced ease, moving like the wind, silent and unseen. Ellie struggled to keep up, her ankle protesting with every step, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. Behind them, voices grew louder, the outlaws closing in. Then the warrior stopped. He motioned for her to hide, his expression sharp with warning. Ellie obeyed, sinking into the undergrowth, barely breathing. The first outlaw crashed through the trees, panting, his rifle swinging side to side. Before he could react, the warrior struck, a blur of motion, a flash of steel. The outlaw barely had time to cry out before he was gone, his body crumpling to the forest floor. Ellie's breath caught. The warrior wiped his blade clean, then met her gaze. There was no cruelty in his eyes, only the certainty of a man who had done what was necessary. More men would come. The warrior gestured for her to move. Ellie hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, her fate no longer solely her own. Somewhere behind them, Red Jack was still hunting, but Ellie was no longer running alone. The wilderness swallowed them whole, a vast, breathing expanse of towering pines, and endless shadow. Ellie stumbled after the warrior, her steps uneven, pain threading up her injured ankle with every movement. He didn't slow. He moved like the land was his, each step sure, each motion seamless. She tried to match his pace, but she was clumsy, an intruder in a world she did not understand. They walked for hours, deeper into the unknown. The morning light burned away the mist, revealing a land untouched by the hands of settlers. Birds called through the canopy, their songs piercing the heavy silence between her and the warrior. She wanted to speak, to ask where they were going, why he had saved her, what he wanted in return. But his presence was as impenetrable as the forest itself. When he finally stopped, it was beside a stream, clear and cold, winding through the rocks like silver thread. He knelt, scooping water into his palms before drinking. Ellie hesitated, watching him. Her throat burned with thirst, but she wasn't sure she should move. He glanced at her, then gestured toward the water. An invitation. She knelt, cupping her hands as he had, bringing the water to her lips. The chill shocked her tongue, but it was clean, crisp. She drank deeply, letting it soothe the rawness inside her. He sat back on his heels, watching her. His eyes, dark as the soil beneath them, studied her with quiet curiosity. She met his gaze, searching for some hint of what he thought of her. If he pitied her, if he regretted helping her. But he gave her nothing. The day stretched on. He led her further from the place where Red Jack's men had fallen, further from the past she had barely escaped. When her ankle faltered, he did not wait for her. He simply turned, crouched low, and with a firm grip, lifted her onto his back. She stiffened at the sudden contact, but he carried her as if she weighed nothing, his strength effortless. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. Night fell, draping the forest in thick darkness. The warrior found a sheltered hollow beneath an overhang of rock and motioned for her to sit. She sank onto the cool earth, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. He moved wordlessly, gathering dry branches and striking flint to spark a fire. The glow flickered across his face, casting sharp shadows over the red streaks of war paint still lining his cheekbones. She studied him in the dim light, trying to unravel the mystery of him. He had saved her, fought for her, carried her. But why? He tore a strip of cloth from his tunic, then gestured toward her ankle. She hesitated before extending her leg. His hands, calloused and steady, wrapped the fabric around the swelling with practiced care. He did not speak. Neither did she. She was not used to silence. With Red Jack, silence had been a trap, the calm before his rage. Here was something else, something almost safe. She did not know when she fell asleep. By morning, the fire had dwindled to embers, and the warrior was gone. Panic gripped her, sharp and sudden. She pushed her feet too quickly, her ankle protesting, her heart pounding against her ribs. Had he abandoned her, left her to fend for herself? A branch snapped. She spun, wild-eyed, only to find him standing at the edge of the clearing, a rabbit dangling limp in his grasp. Relief flooded her before she could stop it. He sat beside the fire, skinning the rabbit with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Ellie watched, uneasy. She had never killed anything, never prepared her own food. Red Jack and his men had taken what they wanted, stolen from those too weak to stop them. The warrior didn't steal. He provided. When he handed her a strip of roasted meat, she hesitated. He had given her water, tended her wounds, carried her when she could not walk. And now he offered her food. She took it. They ate in silence, the taste of smoke and char lingering on her tongue. For the first time in days, she did not feel like prey. She watched him as he cleaned his knife, the firelight glinting off the worn steel. He moved with such certainty, his every action precise, deliberate. He had no hesitation, no doubt. She wanted that. A thought took root in her mind, quiet but insistent. She could learn. She didn't have to be the helpless girl Red Jack had dragged through the dust. She didn't have to wait for someone to save her. The warrior had given her a choice. To run. To survive. Now, she had to decide what came next. The scent of damp earth clung to the morning air, thick with the weight of an impending storm. Ellie crouched low behind a thicket of mesquite, her fingers tight around the worn grip of the knife the warrior had given her. Every breath was measured, every muscle taut with anticipation. Across the clearing, Red Jack stood, his coat stained with travel, his face carved in fury beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He had found her. His men flanked him, a half-dozen killers shifting uneasily, their rifles glinting in the half-light. They had hunted her through the wilderness, driven by wounded pride and Red Jack's thirst for control. But Ellie was not the same woman who had fled in terror. The land had carved something new out of her, something sharper, something that no longer trembled beneath the weight of a man's anger. Beside her, the warrior waited, his tomahawk balanced in his grip, his breath slow and steady. He did not look at her, but she felt his unspoken trust. She had trained for this. She had learned. The time for fear had passed. Red Jack stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly in the hush of the morning. His lips curled into a sneer as his gaze locked onto Ellie. "Did you really think you could run from me?" His voice was a slow drawl, thick with condescension. He tilted his head toward the warrior. "That why you took up with a savage? Thought he'd keep you safe?" He spit into the dust. "You ain't nothing but stolen property, girl." Ellie's pulse pounded, but she did not flinch. Red Jack's fingers flexed over the revolver at his hip, his posture shifting, predatory. "You come with me now, and I'll be generous. I'll kill him quick." The warrior did not react. He did not speak. He simply waited, watching like a panther poised to strike. Ellie stepped forward. The movement surprised Red Jack. For the first time, hesitation flickered in his eyes. She let her voice ring out, clear and steady. "I am not yours." A laugh, cold and sharp. "You sure about that, girl?" His hand hovered over his pistol. "I made you mine. The law says." "To hell with the law," she said. And then she moved. She had learned from the warrior, learned that action was faster than words, that hesitation was death. She did not hesitate now. Her knife flashed as she lunged, slashing for his gun arm. Red Jack snarled, jerking back, but she had already shifted, twisting away before his hand could catch her. Then the warrior struck. He moved like a shadow, silent and swift, his tomahawk cutting through the space where Red Jack had stood. A shot rang out, shattering the morning stillness. The warrior dodged, rolling low, his blade slicing the legs of the outlaw nearest him. The man screamed, falling hard. Gunfire erupted. The clearing became chaos, a brutal storm of sound and fury. Ellie ducked behind a fallen log as bullets tore through the air. The warrior was a blur, weaving through the outlaws, his tomahawk carving swift justice. Ellie's breath came fast, her mind sharp with a single, unshakable thought. She would end this. Red Jack was moving, firing wildly, his rage boiling over into reckless violence. His men were dying around him, cut down by the warrior's precision, but Ellie knew this fight was hers to finish. She rose from cover, heart hammering, feet steady. Red Jack turned, his eyes meeting hers just as she raised the pistol she had taken from a dead man's belt. For the first time, she saw it, the flicker of doubt, the realization that she was not the girl he had beaten and dragged through the dust. She fired. The shot struck his shoulder, spinning him back. He roared, stumbling, clutching at the wound. His pistol came up, but Ellie was already moving, closing the space between them. Her blade found home, sinking deep beneath his ribs. Red Jack gasped. His knees buckled. His breath rattled out in a broken, ragged curse. Ellie stepped back, her chest rising and falling, watching as the life drained from his eyes. It was over. The world settled into silence. The last of Red Jack's men lay still, the clearing littered with bodies and the acrid scent of gunpowder. The warrior stood near the tree lean, blood streaking his arm, but his gaze was on Ellie. She looked back at him, feeling the weight of what she had done, what she had become. For the first time in her life, she was free. The warrior inclined his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement. A choice lay before her now: return to the world she had known, or step fully into the one that had saved her. She turned her gaze toward the open land, where the horizon stretched wide and unbroken. She had survived. Now she would live. The wind howled across the barren expanse, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth and distant memories of battles long past. In the dim light of dusk, the land appeared as a canvas of muted reds and deep browns, etched with the scars of time and hardship. Sarah rode alone along a rugged trail, each hoofbeat punctuating the silence with a steady rhythm of defiance. Her eyes, reflecting the dying light of the sun, held a quiet determination, a spark that refused to be extinguished by the relentless cruelty of fate. Every mile on this unforgiving frontier had honed her spirit, tempering her grief and igniting a resolve that grew stronger with each harsh gust of wind. The solitude of the journey was a constant companion, yet it offered little comfort. Memories of a once warm and hopeful life now drifted like ghosts on the horizon. A faded photograph tucked safely in her saddlebag spoke of happier days, a promise of love and family, now shattered by tragedy. With every passing moment, the landscape whispered secrets of survival and sacrifice, urging her forward even as it threatened to engulf her in despair. As twilight deepened, the subtle hues of dusk gave way to the encroaching darkness, and the fragile barrier between hope and hopelessness thinned. Sarah's eyes, bright and reflective beneath the brim of her weathered hat, surveyed the land with cautious optimism. Yet the serenity of the scene belied the storm that was about to disrupt her hard-won solitude. In the distance, the rhythmic clatter of hooves shattered the silence, a sound as sudden as it was ominous. The tranquility of the frontier was interrupted by the unmistakable approach of a rugged posse. Without warning, a group of men emerged from the swirling dust, a band of hardened cowboys whose eyes glittered with predatory intent. Their leader, a man whose face was as weathered as the land itself and whose eyes burned with cold ambition, signaled the attack with a curt nod. In an instant, the peaceful solitude of the trail was replaced by the violent chaos of betrayal. Sarah's heart hammered against her chest as she spurred her horse to a frantic pace, the desperate rhythm of her escape echoing in the night. But the outlaws moved with a predatory precision, encircling her with an efficiency born of cruelty and hardened resolve. The sound of clashing hooves and the rough commands of her pursuers filled the air as they closed in, leaving no room for escape. In a fleeting moment of confusion and terror, a firm hand seized her from behind, yanking her from the saddle. The force of the abduction knocked the breath from her lungs, and she tumbled to the parched earth, pain mingling with the bitter taste of fear. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause as she struggled against the iron grip of her captors. The leader's voice, rough and devoid of mercy, broke the silence with a chilling proclamation. "We found a surprise," he sneered, his tone as cold as the twilight that now enveloped them. Each word was a cruel reminder of the fate that had been thrust upon her, a fate that seemed as unyielding as the rugged land itself. Even as the dust swirled around her and her senses blurred into a haze of shock and defiance, Sarah's inner fire flickered stubbornly. Her eyes, still burning with a fierce determination, met the gaze of her assailant with a silent vow, a promise that the spirit within her would never be broken. The sensation of cold metal against her skin, the rough calluses of her captor's hand, all served to ignite memories of a past filled with resilience and loss. Each painful moment was a reminder of the strength that had carried her through the worst of days, and the thought of surrender was a luxury she could not afford. With a forceful tug, she was dragged to a waiting wagon, its creaking wheels already eager to devour the miles ahead. The world around her contracted to the narrow confines of captivity and terror. As the wagon jolted along the uneven trail, Sarah's mind raced, plotting, planning, and silently vowing that she would find a way to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. The harsh winds and relentless dust were not unfamiliar adversaries. They were part of the rugged tapestry of survival that had defined her existence. Now, they bore witness to a new chapter of struggle, one that would test her mettle against foes both human and elemental. Even as the silhouettes of the cowboys faded into the gathering darkness, the echoes of their laughter and cruel words lingered like a curse. Sarah's thoughts churned with the bitter tang of betrayal, yet beneath it all lay an ember of hope, a belief that somewhere in the vast, untamed wilderness, the promise of redemption still awaited her. The wagon creaked onward into the night, carrying her into the unknown, where the harsh beauty of the frontier and the cruelty of man would soon collide. In that moment, as the final vestiges of daylight disappeared behind the rugged hills, a quiet determination took root in her heart. Though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and the shadow of her captors loomed large, the promise of a new dawn glimmered faintly on the horizon. With one last defiant glance at the starless sky, Sarah resolved that her story was far from over, and that the struggle for her freedom would ignite a fire capable of outlasting even the darkest night. The world around her had narrowed to a grim circle of makeshift tents and flickering lanterns, each crude structure a testament to a life defined by brutality and survival. Sarah found herself confined within this rough encampment, the air heavy with the stench of sweat, stale tobacco, and fear. The relentless crackle of a dying fire punctuated the oppressive silence, its feeble light barely softening the harsh lines of the cowboys' faces as they loitered with indifferent cruelty. In this den of lawlessness, every sound, a clink of metal, a low murmur, the shuffle of heavy boots, served as a constant reminder of her captivity. Night had draped itself over the camp like a suffocating shroud, and in the half-light, Sarah's thoughts churned with bitter memories of a life stolen away. She recalled fragments of laughter, whispered promises of a future filled with warmth and belonging, now all turned to ash by merciless misfortune. Each recollection was both a salve and a wound, fueling her inner fire even as it deepened the sting of despair. There were moments when the oppressive darkness of her situation threatened to swallow her whole, when a weight of isolation and hopelessness pressed upon her chest with relentless force. Yet, amid the pervasive gloom, the faint spark of defiance refused to be extinguished. Her captors, a ragtag band of rough-hewn men, had taken little care to hide their contempt. Their voices, coarse and unyielding, carried careless threats and idle boasts that stung sharper than any lash. The leader, a gaunt figure whose eyes flickered with a cold, calculating malice, held a position of unwritten authority. He barked orders with a tone that brooked no argument, and his presence loomed over the camp like a specter of imminent violence. In the brief, stolen moments when their attention waned, Sarah studied their expressions, each one a mask of hardened indifference and latent brutality. Their laughter, rough and mirthless, echoed in the night and underscored the cruel irony of her situation. Within the confines of a small, dim corner, Sarah allowed herself a moment of vulnerable introspection. She recalled the warmth of her family's embrace, the gentle cadence of her mother's lullabies, and the dreams that once danced in her eyes. Now, those dreams lay in tatters, scattered among the dust and desolation of the frontier. The camp's rough, unforgiving reality clashed violently with the tender memories of a past that felt both distant and desperately missed. In the quiet murmur of the wind and the distant sounds of shifting cattle, she could almost hear the echoes of hope calling her name, a fragile reminder that even in the darkest of places, the possibility of redemption flickered like a solitary candle in the vast night. As the night deepened, subtle signs of unrest began to ripple through the camp. Hushed whispers floated in the air, charged with a mixture of fear and awe as some cowboys exchanged furtive glances at the dark horizon. A palpable tension gripped the men, an unspoken acknowledgement of a presence that lay beyond their immediate control. Sarah's ears caught fragments of conversation, half-heard words like tracks and warriors, spoken in tones that trembled with both dread and anticipation. Even as her heart pounded in her ears, she sensed that these murmurs held the promise of change, however uncertain or perilous it might be. Outside the ramshackle shelter of her temporary prison, the rugged landscape whispered its own secrets. The barren land, scarred by time and hardship, seemed to murmur of ancient battles and forgotten heroes. The contrast between the wild, indifferent majesty of the frontier and the pettiness of human cruelty was stark and bitterly ironic. For Sarah, every gust of wind, every shifting shadow cast by the flickering lantern light became a silent herald of something unknown, a turning of the tide that might yet free her from this living nightmare. In that heavy silence, as the night stretched on with agonizing slowness, Sarah's defiance solidified into a quiet, unyielding resolve. Her spirit, though battered by the weight of despair and the sting of betrayal, kindled a determination that refused to be doused. She resolved that no matter the depths of her current misery, she would find a way to reclaim her dignity and, in time, her freedom. The murmurs of the camp, the cruel laughter of her captors, and the ghostly echoes of a life once cherished coalesced into a singular purpose, a promise to herself that this ordeal would not be the end of her story. As the first faint hints of dawn began to tint the sky with a cold, indifferent blue, the restless murmur of the camp gave way to an uneasy stillness. The darkness receded just enough to reveal the outlines of an approaching change, a silent assurance that the night's despair was but a precursor to the trials that lay ahead. In that quiet, liminal moment, Sarah's gaze lifted toward the horizon, her eyes reflecting both the sorrow of the night and the glimmer of hope that dared to break through the encroaching gloom. Her struggle was far from over, and the promise of a new day beckoned with the subtle certainty of an untold destiny. In the pre-dawn gloom, a lone figure emerged from the endless sprawl of rugged hills, his silhouette blending with the shadows of the wild. Tahoma moved with the quiet certainty of one who had long learned to read the language of the land, each measured step a testament to battles fought and victories earned in silence. The first hints of light crept across the horizon, casting an amber glow over a disheveled cowboy camp that had ensnared an unwitting captive. The camp's crude structures, thrown together in a desperate bid for shelter, betrayed nothing of the impending reckoning. From his hidden perch, Tahoma observed the encampment with eyes that burned with quiet resolve. His thoughts flickered back to memories of past transgressions, a legacy of exploitation and disregard for honor that had long festered among his people. Now, as he surveyed the ragged assembly of outlaws, a familiar anger kindled within him. He signaled to his small band of warriors, their forms emerging from the darkness like wraiths, each man moving with a precision that bespoke years of honing survival skills in the unforgiving frontier. Within the heart of the encampment, amid drunken boasts and coarse laughter, a solitary figure stood apart. Sarah's gaze, though heavy with despair, burned with a defiant light that resonated deep within Tahoma's soul. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of the resilience that had carried him through his own hardships, a quiet but unyielding strength that refused to yield to tyranny. For a fleeting heartbeat, the clamor of distant threats fell away, leaving only an unspoken acknowledgement of shared suffering and the promise of redemption. As the first fragile rays of dawn bled into the sky, Tahoma's warriors began their silent advance. Like shadows given life, they slipped through the periphery of the camp, their movements orchestrated with the meticulous care of a seasoned force poised to strike. One by one, the cowboys, who had slumbered in careless abandon, were roused by sudden, brutal incursions. The night was shattered by the swift, almost imperceptible flurry of calculated strikes, each movement designed to dismantle the outlaws' crude order. Amid the ensuing chaos, Tahoma pressed forward with unerring purpose. The world around him narrowed until the only sound was the rapid beat of his heart and the distant, staccato rhythms of combat. He navigated the turmoil with a silent determination, each step drawing him inexorably toward the captive whose plight had ignited his ire. Reaching Sarah, he extended a hand as steady as the ancient mountains that had witnessed his own trials. In that suspended moment, filled with the raw pulse of survival and the weight of unspoken oaths, their eyes met, and an alliance was forged without a single word exchanged. The brief silence between them spoke volumes. Sarah, her spirit bruised yet unbowed, allowed herself a measured nod as she took hold of Tahoma's offered hand. In that gesture, she accepted not only the promise of rescue, but also the unspoken vow that their fates were now interwoven. Around them, the battle raged, a cacophony of clashing wills and the relentless drive of nature itself converging in a symphony of defiance. The cowboys, unprepared for the disciplined fury of the Comanche warriors, faltered under the sudden onslaught, their disorder sowing the seeds of their inevitable collapse. Yet even as the tactical advantage began to tilt in favor of Tahoma and his men, a deeper conflict simmered beneath the surface. The clash was not merely of arms, but of worlds, of ancient honor pitted against the brutal immediacy of lawless survival. In the tension-laden air, every blow struck, every whispered command, carried the legacy of a people determined to reclaim what had long been stolen. Tahoma's gaze, steady and unyielding, conveyed that this was not a mere rescue, but a reclamation of dignity, a defiant stand against an injustice that had festered for far too long. As the first light of day broke fully over the scarred landscape, a tentative calm began to settle over the battered camp. The echoes of combat subsided into a heavy stillness, punctuated by the steady breathing of those who had survived. In that quiet interlude, the bond between Tahoma and Sarah shone as a beacon of hope, a fragile promise that amidst the desolation of captivity and cruelty, a new beginning might yet emerge. Though the battle was far from over and the horizon still held the threat of further strife, the dawning day whispered of possibilities uncharted, inviting them to step forward together into the uncertain light of a renewed destiny. The first light of dawn broke over a battered camp as chaos reached its fevered pitch. The remnants of the cowboy posse, reeling from the precise onslaught of Tahoma's warriors, clashed desperately with the disciplined fury of the Comanche. Amid the tumult, the air was punctuated by sharp cries, the crack of gunfire, and the relentless pounding of hooves, a symphony of violence that bore witness to the final struggle for dominion over this forsaken stretch of land. In the midst of this melee, Sarah found herself caught between the remnants of her tormentors and the resolute warriors who had come to liberate her. Clutching a fallen rifle with trembling determination, she advanced with the hesitant valor of one reborn in adversity. Every step she took was an act of defiance, a rejection of the fear that had long held her captive. With each gunshot that split the morning air, she felt the weight of her past dissolving, replaced by an unyielding resolve to forge a future of her own making. Across the fray, Tahoma moved like a wraith among the chaos, his eyes never straying from the cowboy leader who now stood isolated amid a swirl of dust and despair. The cowboy, his face etched with both defiance and resignation, clutched his weapon as if it were a last vestige of a life steeped in brutality. Their eyes met across the battlefield, a silent exchange laden with the history of a land scarred by cruelty and conquest. In that glance lay the unspoken acknowledgement that this confrontation was more than a mere battle. It was the culmination of countless injustices and the promise of a reckoning long overdue. As the struggle intensified, the combatants' movements became a blur of purpose and desperation. The thundering hooves, the clang of metal against metal, and the piercing cries of those caught in the crossfire created an atmosphere where survival was measured in fleeting moments of instinct. Sarah, her heart pounding in rhythm with the tumult around her, found herself rising to the occasion. With each determined stride, she shed the remnants of her captivity, embodying the fierce spirit of the frontier that had sustained her through endless nights of despair. In a sudden, decisive moment, Tahoma and the cowboy leader converged at the epicenter of the chaos. Their confrontation unfolded in a series of rapid, almost imperceptible exchanges, a dance of measured blows and parries that spoke to a lifetime of hardship. Tahoma's every movement was deliberate, imbued with the weight of ancestral honor and the grief of a people long oppressed. The cowboy leader, equally resolute yet haunted by the ghosts of his own choices, parried each strike with a grim determination that belied the futility of his resistance. The clash between them was not only a battle of physical prowess, but also a collision of ideals, a raw, unfiltered confrontation between an old world of merciless exploitation and a new dawn of emerging justice. Amid the din of combat, the world seemed to slow around Sarah. She watched, transfixed, as the cowboy leader staggered under the unrelenting assault of Tahoma's precise strikes. In that suspended moment, the trajectory of the conflict became clear. The forces of unyielding honor were surging forward, poised to reclaim the dignity of a land ravaged by greed and cruelty. The decisive blow came swiftly, a final, resolute strike that sent the cowboy leader crumpling to the ground, his weapon clattering uselessly in the dust. The silence that followed was as profound as it was transient, a momentary pause before the inexorable tide of destiny swept over the battlefield. As the echoes of the showdown reverberated through the air, the combatants gradually retreated into a weary stillness. Tahoma's warriors, their purpose fulfilled, began to gather the remnants of the defeated posse, ensuring that no further threat would disturb the fragile peace now emerging. In the clearing that remained, Sarah stepped forward, her eyes meeting Tahoma's with a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. The violence of the morning had given way to a palpable calm, a fragile truce born of shared suffering and the promise of renewal. In that quiet interlude, the harsh realities of the frontier receded, replaced by the tender hope of a new beginning. Sarah's voice, soft yet resolute, broke the silence as she whispered a promise to herself and to the land that had borne witness to her suffering. She would no longer be defined by the cruelty of the past, but by the strength that had carried her through it. Tahoma, his gaze steady and compassionate, offered a nod, a silent vow that together they would reclaim what had been stolen, forging a path toward redemption even as the shadows of the old world lingered on the horizon. With the battlefield now a tableau of both ruin and rebirth, the first full rays of sunlight illuminated a scene marked by both scars and the promise of healing. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with the lingering echoes of conflict and the enduring challenges of a harsh land. Yet the resolute glimmer in Sarah's eyes and the unwavering determination in Tahoma's stance heralded the dawn of a new chapter. As the day unfolded, the promise of redemption mingled with the quiet courage of those who dared to dream. A promise that even in the face of relentless darkness, hope would continue to kindle the flames of a future yet to be written. A cold wind curled through the town, stirring dust in the empty streets. The sky was the color of iron, and the air held the thick, metallic scent of an approaching storm. The wooden gallows stood at the center of the square, its rough-hewn beams darkened by years of weather and use. A single rope swayed from the crossbeam, creaking softly like a whisper from the dead. The town had gathered, boots scuffing against the date, hushed voices passing like ghostly murmurs. Naya stood beneath the noose, wrists bound, her face bruised but unreadable. Her dark eyes, sharp as flint, swept across the onlookers, not in search of mercy, but for something else. Someone else. The wind lifted her long black hair, strands clinging to the dried blood on her cheek. She had always known death might come for her in a town like this, but not like this, not at the hands of cowards. Jed Blackjack Calloway leaned lazily against the post of the gallows, chewing a strip of tobacco, his long black duster brushing the ground. He was a man who had never feared the weight of a soul, nor the cost of taking one. A cruel smile played at his lips as he looked her over. "You should have run, girl," he said, spitting to the side. "Would have done you better than stealing from me." Naya didn't flinch. Her voice, steady despite the tightness in her throat, cut through the hush of the crowd. "I stole nothing." Black Jack let out a bark of laughter, shaking his head. "That right. 'Cause my boys here tell me you were sneaking around where you had no business being. Stealing is stealing. Gold, horses, secrets. Makes no difference to me." He turned to the crowd, throwing his arms out as if he were putting on a show. "Now, I ain't a cruel man. I'd give anyone a fair chance to answer for their sins. But this here," he jabbed a gloved finger toward her, "this is justice." The crowd remained silent. No one dared challenge him. Nia exhaled slowly, her jaw tight. She had seen men like him before, men who mistook fear for power, who built their empires on the backs of the voiceless. She would not beg. If this was to be her end, then she would meet it with dignity. The preacher cleared his throat and stepped forward, wringing his hands. A frail man with a trembling voice. "Miss, if you have any words to make peace with the Lord." "I have made my peace," she said. A muscle twitched in Black Jack's jaw. He yanked the preacher aside, stepping up onto the platform beside her. "Enough talk. Let's get this done." The noose was pulled over her head, the rope rough against her skin. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, but her face remained impassive. She turned her gaze back to the crowd, scanning them one last time. Still, he was not there. The realization struck like a knife to the gut. Taza did not know. Somewhere out in the wild, beyond these lifeless streets, beyond the reach of this news, the man who had once held her heart was unaware that she stood at the edge of death. Would he come too late? Would he ever know what had happened to her? The wooden trapdoor beneath her feet groaned. Black Jack raised a hand, savoring the moment, letting the tension settle thick over the square. The crowd shifted uneasily. A few men cast glances toward the ground. Women clutched their children's hands. Then, he dropped his hand. The lever was pulled. Nia fell. The snap of the rope sent a shudder through the crowd. Some turned away. Others lingered, watching the lifeless sway of a body as the wind carried her into silence. Black Jack stepped down from the platform, brushing the dust from his coat. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, his grin widening. "Let that be a lesson," he drawled. "Ain't no man nor woman above the law in my town." Then, without a second glance, he mounted his horse, tipping his hat to the preacher. "Bury her if you got the stomach for it. I got places to be." One by one, the townsfolk dispersed. Within minutes, the square was empty again, save for the crows circling overhead. The noose creaked in the wind. The dust settled back into silence. Miles away, in the heart of the wilderness, Taza paused mid-stride. A feeling, cold and sharp, passed through him, a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, toward the distant town. Something was wrong. The wind carried the scent of blood and damp earth as Taza crouched low to the ground, his fingers tracing the faint imprints left behind by hooves and boot heels. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day old. He could see where the dust had been disturbed, the weight of each step pressing deep into the dirt. These men were not running. They did not fear pursuit. That would change soon enough. He had buried Nia beneath the open sky, where the wind could carry her spirit to the great plains. He had laid her to rest with the careful reverence of a warrior, whispering a vow as he placed the last stone atop her grave. He had not wept. The time for grief was gone, swallowed by the fire now burning in his chest. They had taken her life as if it meant nothing. Now he would take theirs the same way. Taza moved with the silence of a shadow, his body one with the land. The night stretched wide around him, the stars watching with cold indifference. He followed the tracks through the ravine, past the twisted remains of a broken fence, where a smoldering campfire told him he was close. The embers still pulsed with life, whispering stories of men who had sat beside them not long ago. A whiskey bottle lay discarded in the dirt. A half-eaten meal, abandoned. They had been comfortable, unaware of the storm coming for them. A voice carried through the trees, low, slurred with drink. Taza melted into the darkness, his breath slow and measured. He had no need for blind fury. A warrior struck when the moment was right. Two men sat by the riverbank, their boots kicked up on a log. One of them, a lanky man with a scar running down his cheek, tossed a knife into the dirt and let out a dry chuckle. "Ain't never seen Black Jack so riled up," he muttered. "Acted like that girl spit in his damn face." The other man, broader, slower in speech, snorted. "Man's got a reputation to keep. Can't let no half-blood run round making a fool of him." Tarz's grip tightened around his knife. His pulse drummed in his ears, steady as a war song. Still, the first man mused, scratching his chin. "Didn't sit right with me. She ain't cry, ain't beg. Just looked at us like," he shuddered and spat, "like she was already dead." The broad man shrugged. "Dead's dead." Taza moved before the next breath. His blade found the soft flesh of the broad man's throat, silencing him before he could make a sound. The scarred one barely had time to register the movement before Taza's hand clamped over his mouth, dragging him back into the trees. The man struggled, thrashing, but Taza held firm. He pressed the knife's edge just beneath his chin, feeling the pulse hammering beneath the skin. "Where is Blackjack?" Taza's voice was low, dangerous. The man whimpered, his breath ragged. "Tucson," he stammered. "They're heading for Tucson." Taza felt the lie as soon as the words left the man's mouth. His grip tightened. "Try again." The man's resolve crumbled. "Fort Dawes," he choked. They set up in Fort Dawes. That's the truth, I swear." Taza's knife flashed, and the struggle ended. He let the body slump against the tree, wiping the blade clean before sliding it back into his belt. The wind stirred the leaves, rustling through the branches like whispered approval. He had a destination now. He turned back toward the dying fire, his mind already forming a plan. The fort was nearly a day's ride from here, nestled in a valley surrounded by jagged cliffs. It would not be an easy place to infiltrate, but he did not expect it to be. As he stepped away from the bodies, a voice broke the silence. "That was quick work." Taza spun, his knife in hand, but the figure leaning against the tree did not flinch. He was older, wrapped in a tattered buffalo hide, his beard streaked with silver. His rifle rested casually across his arm, but there was nothing casual in his eyes. "Gray Wolf," Taza said, recognizing the name before it was spoken. The man was a legend among those who lived beyond the edges of the law. A tracker, a hunter, a ghost who had survived more battles than most men had seen. The old man nodded. "Been watching you since you left that grave." His eyes flicked toward the bodies. "Figured you'd come this way. Vengeance has a smell to it." Taza said nothing. He did not have time for riddles. Gray Wolf studied him for a long moment before pushing off the tree, adjusting the rifle strap over his shoulder. "Fort Dawes ain't a place you just walk into," he said. "They got numbers, high walls, and a mean streak that runs deep." Taza met his gaze. "I don't plan on walking." A slow grin spread across the old man's face. "Didn't think you would." He nodded toward the horses tied near the river. "You take one, I take one. We ride at dawn." Taza hesitated. He did not trust easily, but trust was a luxury he could not afford to weigh for long. He gave a single nod. Gray Wolf chuckled, stepping past him toward the horses. "Blackjack ain't gonna know what's coming for him." The stars overhead flickered like distant firelight. In the morning, the hunt would truly begin. The first light of dawn stretched long fingers across the land, turning the dust red like old blood. Taza rode hard, his body low against the horse's back, his grip firm on the reins. Gray Wolf kept pace beside him, his rifle slung across his back, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Neither man spoke as they pressed forward, the sound of hoofbeats swallowed by the endless stretch of the frontier. Fort Dawes loomed ahead, its walls rising from the valley floor like the ribs of some great dead beast. Built from thick timber and stone, it had once been a military outpost, but now it belonged to men who answered to no flag. A gang stronghold, a place where law meant the weight of a bullet and mercy was the first thing left behind at the gates. They reined in their horses at the edge of a bluff overlooking the valley. Smoke curled from inside the fort. The smell of burning wood and stale whiskey carried on the wind. A few men patrolled the walls, rifles slung over their shoulders, unaware of the storm creeping toward them. Gray Wolf exhaled through his nose, watching the scene below. "Ain't gonna be easy." Taza said nothing. It didn't need to be easy. The old man studied him for a long moment. "You want this done quiet, or you want him to know why they are din?" Taza turned his gaze toward the fort, his hands tightening around the reins. They should know. A slow grin tugged at the corner of Grey Wolf's mouth. Figured. They moved as the sun dipped lower, weaving through the brush, picking their path with the patience of men who had spent their lives hunting prey that bit back. The shadows stretched long as they crept toward the outer fence, the wood worn and splintered beneath their hands. Taza tested the boards, old, dry, weak. He wedged his knife between the planks and twisted. A quiet crack, a space just wide enough to slip through. Inside, the fort pulsed with the sluggish movement of men too comfortable in their safety. Lanterns swung from wooden beams, casting uneven pools of light across the dirt. A few men laughed near the barracks, passing a bottle between them. Others lounged against crates, their holsters loose, their guards lower than they should have been. Taza moved like the wind through tall grass, silent and certain. Grey Wolf followed, his steps careful, measured. They reached the first sentry before the man even knew he was not alone. A quick hand over the mouth, a blade drawn across the throat, and the body sank into the dirt without a sound. One by one, they carved their way through the heart of the fort, leaving only stillness in their wake. Taza's blood burned hot, but his mind stayed cold. This was not rage. This was not recklessness. This was justice, pulled tight like a bowstring, loose with precision. Then the silence shattered. A door swung open, the sudden spill of lantern light catching the glint of a blade. A shout. A gun cocked. The moment stretched, balanced on the edge of a knife. Then fire erupted. Grey Wolf's rifle roared first, dropping a man before his hand could reach his holster. Taza moved fast, driving his knife into another before he could raise the alarm. But the damage was done. Voices rose in confusion. Boots thundered against the wooden planks. Taza pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard. Grey Wolf reloaded with practiced efficiency, his expression unchanged. Guess quiet ain't an option no more. Taza wiped the blood from his blade and met the old man's eyes. Then we finish it loud. A shot rang out, splintering the wood near his head. They ducked low, moving fast, using the chaos as cover. The fort erupted into movement, men scrambling for their weapons, shouts of confusion turning to battle cries. Taza surged forward, his knife flashing as he took down another man, the scent of gunpowder thick in the air. A bullet grazed his arm, but he did not stop. He did not feel it. Black Jack was here. The thought propelled him forward, deeper into the heart of the stronghold. He kicked open a door, sending it crashing against the wall. Inside, men scrambled for their guns, their eyes wide with sudden understanding. He did not give them the chance. A knife to the gut, a bullet through the chest, a snap of bone beneath his hands. It was brutal, quick, necessary. Then, across the smoke-choked yard, he saw him. Black Jack stood at the top of the stairs leading to what had once been the commander's quarters, his coat billowing in the night air. A rifle rested easy in his grip, his expression unreadable. But there was no fear in his eyes, only recognition. Well, Black Jack called, voice cutting through the gunfire. Looks like you got some fight in you after all. Taza started toward him, blade slick with blood, heart hammering. Black Jack grinned, raising his rifle. Let's see how long that lasts. The night air crackled with tension, thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. The fires burning in scattered barrels cast flickering shadows across the yard, distorting the figures that stood poised for the final battle. Taza took slow, measured steps forward, his grip tightening around the handle of his knife. Black Jack stood at the top of the wooden staircase, his rifle aimed squarely at Taza's chest, his smirk laced with cruel amusement. Ain't often a man comes knocking on his own funeral, Black Jack drawled, tilting his head. But I suppose you Comanche got different ways about things. Taza said nothing. Words were wasted on the dead. Black Jack exhaled, leveling his rifle. Let's get this over with. The crack of the shot split the air. Taza twisted, the bullet whizzing past his ribs, tearing through the fabric of his tunic but missing flesh. He sprang forward, closing the distance before Black Jack could reload. The outlaw barely had time to curse before Taza's knife slashed upward, catching his rifle and sending it clattering down the steps. Black Jack staggered but recovered fast. His fist swung out, catching Taza across the jaw, sending him reeling. Taza tasted blood, but it only fueled the fire in his chest. Black Jack drew his pistol. Taza lunged. The gun went off. Pain seared through Taza's shoulder, but he did not stop. His knife found its mark, sinking deep into Black Jack's side. The outlaw let out a strangled grunt, his grip on the pistol faltering. Taza ripped the blade free and drove his fist into the wound, twisting. Black Jack howled, his legs buckling as he stumbled back against the railing of the balcony. His eyes darted around, wild, desperate. His breath came in ragged gasps, blood dripping from his side. You think this changes anything?" he wheezed. "She's still gone." Taza stepped forward, his own breath heavy, his chest rising and falling with the weight of everything that had brought him here. "She was never yours to take." Black Jack sneered, but there was no laughter in his eyes anymore. Only fear. Taza struck. His blade found home in the outlaw's chest, driving deep, pinning him against the wooden railing. Black Jack gasped, a gurgling sound escaping his lips as his body sagged. For a moment, he clung to life, his hands grasping weakly at the knife buried in him. His lips curled in an attempt at one last smack, but it never fully formed. His body convulsed once, then fell still. Taza ripped the blade free, and Black Jack's body slumped over the railing, tumbling down the steps, landing in the dirt with a dull, final thud. The gunfire around the fort had slowed, the echoes of battle fading. Grey Wolf stepped into view, his rifle still smoking. He took one look at the body and nodded. "Well," he muttered, adjusting his grip on his weapon. "That settles that." Taza didn't answer. His heart still thundered in his chest, his mind clouded with the weight of everything that had led him here. The fort, once a place of unchecked cruelty, stood silent now. The men who had filled it with violence lay in the dirt, their reign of terror over. Taza turned his gaze to the horizon. The first hints of dawn crept along the edges of the sky, bathing the land in soft golds and deep purples. He had avenged Naya, but vengeance did not bring her back. Grey Wolf stepped beside him, watching as the sky brightened. "What now?" Taza exhaled, his fingers loosening around the hilt of his blade. He had lived for this moment, for this reckoning. But now, standing in its aftermath, he realized vengeance was a road with no clear end. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I ride." Grey Wolf chuckled, shaking his head. "Figured as much." He patted the dust off his coat and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Well, if you're riding, best do it before the vultures show up." Taza nodded. He stepped down from the balcony, past the fallen body of Black Jack, past the blood staining the ground. He mounted his horse, gripping the reins with a steady hand. The wind whispered through the ruins of the fort, carrying away the ghosts of the past. Without another word, he turned toward the horizon and rode into the coming dawn.